I always believed that success would fix everything. If I just worked hard enough, made the right moves, then eventually everything would fall into place. I thought I was doing it for Laura and for us, for our future. But the more I worked, the more distant we became. I remember when we first met. Things were different back then. It felt like we were two halves of the same whole. We had fun, we talked about everything, we dreamed about the future. I thought I could build us a perfect life. I thought I could give her everything: security, comfort, the things I never had growing up. And I thought if I just kept pushing, everything would be fine. But I didn't see it happening. I didn't see her slipping away. I didn't see how my ambition was becoming a wall between us. The late nights, the work calls, the projects I couldn't stop thinking about, everything seemed more important than spending time with her. And she never said anything at first. I kept telling myself, she understands. She gets it. She wants me to succeed. But that wasn't the truth, was it? I was always there physically, but emotionally, I was miles away. She'd ask me about my day, but I was too tired to really answer. I'd nod, smile, tell her I was doing it for us. But I wasn't really listening to her anymore. I wasn't even listening to myself. I thought that if I just pushed a little harder, made a little more money, things would get better. That she'd see the effort I was putting in. That we'd finally be able to relax. But it never worked out that way. When she started asking me why I was never home, why I never seemed present, I told her it was temporary. Just a little longer, I'd say. Once I hit this milestone, everything will change. But it didn't. And I knew deep down that it wasn't about the milestones. It was about us, not just the future, but the here and now. And I wasn't giving her the here and now. I think I convinced myself that success was the only thing that mattered. I'd tell myself, once I get to the next level, everything will be better. She'll understand. But that's the problem, isn't it? It's always about the next thing. The next promotion, the next deal, the next goal. I was chasing something that didn't exist, and in doing so, I pushed the one person who mattered most away. At some point, I stopped asking myself what I was really trying to achieve. I stopped asking if what I was doing was worth it. And by the time I realized it, she was already pulling away. But I didn't see it until it was too late. I had everything. Well, I thought I did. But the one thing I didn't have was the only thing that really mattered: her. And I didn't know how to fix that. At first, it wasn't obvious. It was small things. Little comments here and there. Laura would ask me to join her for dinner, but I'd be stuck at work. She'd make plans for us to spend the weekend together, but I'd cancel at the last minute because of a deadline. I thought she understood. I told myself, this is temporary. Once I get this promotion, everything will be better. But what I didn't see was how much I was losing. The silence in the house started to feel different. I could hear it when I came home. She was still there, but she wasn't there. The laughter, the warmth, the easy conversations we used to have, all of that slowly disappeared. She'd be on her phone, or reading a book. And I'd be on my laptop, trying to finish up work. I'd tell myself, it's just one more project, just a few more months of this, and then we'll be okay. But every time I said that, it felt more like I was justifying my choices rather than actually fixing the problem. I could feel the distance growing between us, but I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to admit that the thing I was building for our future was coming at the expense of what we had in the present. I was always justifying it. I'm doing this for us, but deep down, I knew I was losing her. She'd ask me how my day was, and I'd give her the same tired answers. It was fine. Busy. And I'd move on. It was easy to do that, easy to pretend like it wasn't affecting me. But I could see it in her eyes, the way she was starting to pull away. The way she wasn't waiting up for me anymore, and I think she finally had enough. One night, after another late night at the office, she looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "We need to talk." I knew what was coming. She was finally calling me out. I could see it on her face. It wasn't just the work anymore, it was me. She said, "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Mark. I'm here, and you're not. You're physically here. But emotionally, you're somewhere else. I need you, Mark. I need more than just your presence. I need you to be with me, not just in the room, but in my life. I can't do this alone anymore. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That I was just doing what I had to do. That I was building a future for us. But instead I said nothing. And that was the problem. I was too busy trying to prove something to the world, to prove something to myself, that I couldn't see what was slipping through my fingers. The thing is, she wasn't asking for much. She wasn't asking me to give up my career, or my goals, or my ambitions. She was asking for the one thing I couldn't give her, my attention. My time. My love. My presence. And as I stood there, listening to her words, I realized she wasn't asking for me to change. She was asking me to show up. And I wasn't. I kept thinking I could fix it later. That once I hit this next milestone, it would all make sense. But by then, it was already too late. She was already starting to pull away. And I couldn't stop it. I knew things were bad. But I didn't know how bad until Laura said the words. I think we need a break, Mark. When she said it, it didn't hit me right away. It was almost like I was in denial. A break? I asked, trying to make sense of it. What do you mean? We've been through rough patches before. This is just a phase. We'll get through it. But she shook her head, looking at me with those tired eyes, the same eyes I hadn't really looked into for months. No, Mark. It's not just a phase. I need more than what you're giving me. I need more than this life we're living. Her voice was calm, but there was a strength behind it. A strength I hadn't seen in her before. I didn't know what to say. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could say the right thing, promise her everything would change, and we'd just pick up where we left off. But when I looked at her, I realized that she wasn't waiting for promises anymore. She was already done waiting. And that was the hardest part to swallow. I wanted to tell her, please don't go. I'll change. I'll do better. I'll be present, I'll put you first. I swear I will. But the truth was, I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to give her the one thing she needed without breaking everything else. I didn't know how to stop chasing something that felt so distant, that no matter how hard I tried, it always seemed just out of reach. She looked at me for a moment, as if she was searching for something, maybe an apology, maybe some sign that I finally understood. And I felt the weight of all the moments I had let slip by without fully realizing it. All those evenings I was too tired to really listen, all those weekends I spent away, chasing a future that seemed so far away. I watched her walk out the door that night, and I realized I couldn't stop her. She wasn't leaving because she didn't love me. She was leaving because I hadn't shown her that I loved her enough. And as much as I hated to admit it, I knew she was right. She was right to walk away. For the first time in a long time, I was faced with the truth. I was so focused on everything that didn't matter that I had neglected the one thing I needed to protect, my relationship with her. My relationship with the one person who had always been there, supporting me, loving me, and waiting for me to finally realize what was right in front of me. But now, it was too late. She was gone. And I was left with nothing but regret. I didn't know what to do with myself after Laura left. I thought I could handle it. I thought I could just throw myself into work and distract myself long enough for things to go back to normal. But it didn't work. It never works. The first few days felt like a fog. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and stare at the empty space where she used to be. I told myself I'd just stay busy, that I'd get used to it, that this was a temporary setback. But each night when I walked through the door, there was no greeting, no smile, no warmth. Just silence. And that silence started to suffocate me. I couldn't remember the last time I had really felt anything. I was so used to being numb, so focused on getting ahead, that I forgot what it felt like to be present with someone, to be truly alive in a moment. It was easier to be distracted, easier to pretend I had it all together. But now, without her, I felt like I was unraveling. The loneliness was the worst part. It crept in at first, just a small pang when I'd reach for my phone to call her and remember I couldn't. Then it turned into something deeper, something almost suffocating. I had friends, sure, but it wasn't the same. I had colleagues, but they weren't the ones who knew me. They weren't the ones who cared about the small things, the little details of my day, the way I liked my coffee, or how I'd joke about the stupid things I'd seen on my commute. Those were the things that made me feel seen. Laura had seen me, really seen me, in a way no one else ever had, and now she was gone. I started replaying everything in my mind, the moments where I should have put down the phone and listened to her, the times I should have made her feel like she mattered more than my work. I started to see all the small things I missed. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about her art, the way she would laugh at my bad jokes, the way she always took care of the little things, making our home feel like home. I took all of that for granted, and now I had nothing left but memories of a life I wasn't present for. I thought back to the day we had that conversation, the one where she said we needed to talk. I should have listened. I should have heard the pain in her voice when she told me she needed more than just my body in the room. She needed me. And I had convinced myself that success was the answer, that once I had enough, I could finally focus on what mattered. But I never realized that what mattered was already slipping away. I didn't even know what I was working toward anymore. I had everything I thought I wanted, a promotion, a bigger paycheck, more recognition. But none of it mattered when I came home and the house was empty. I started to question everything. Was this success really worth it? Was it really what I wanted? Because in the end, what did any of it mean if I couldn't share it with the person I loved? The regrets piled up, heavy and crushing. And every time I thought about the future, it felt like I was looking into a void. A future I couldn't picture without her. And I knew in that moment that I'd messed up. That I'd let the one thing I truly cared about slip through my fingers. It had been weeks since Laura left, and I still wasn't sure how to move on. I was stuck, caught between the regret of what I'd lost and the overwhelming feeling that nothing would ever be the same. There were moments I thought I might be able to fix it, but I didn't know how. I didn't even know if she'd want me to try. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I ran into her. It wasn't planned, it wasn't expected. I was at the grocery store, just picking up some basics, when I turned a corner, and there she was, standing in the produce aisle, looking exactly the same, and yet not. For a second, I froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if she wanted to talk to me, or if she even cared to see me anymore. But she saw me before I could turn and walk away, and her face, it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was something else, something I couldn't quite place. "Mark," she said softly, like she wasn't sure how to say my name anymore. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I'd rehearsed this moment in my head 100 times, but now that it was real, I felt completely unprepared. She gave a small smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How have you been?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. I wanted to say, "I've been terrible. I've been miserable without you. I've made a mess of everything." But instead I just said I've been okay. It sounded so empty, so hollow. It was nothing like what I wanted to say. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was searching for something in my face. Then she said, "I've been doing okay too. I'm finding my way, Mark. I think it's been good for me to step back and focus on myself for a while." I nodded, but inside, something twisted. Part of me wanted to beg her to come back, to tell her I was sorry, that I was ready to do whatever it took. But another part of me felt this strange sense of pride in hearing her say that she was doing well. Maybe it was the fact that she was stronger than I'd given her credit for, or maybe it was the realization that she was moving forward, without me. I asked the stupidest question. "Are you seeing anyone?" She didn't immediately answer. Instead, she just shook her head slowly and said, "No, not yet. I'm still figuring things out. But I think I'm learning to be okay on my own first." I think I needed to be okay with me before I could share that with someone else. I could feel the weight of her words, heavy and real. She wasn't saying it to hurt me, but it did. The truth of it cut deeper than I expected. She smiled again, this time a little more genuine. I hope you're doing okay, Mark. I really do. You deserve to find your own peace too. And then she did something I didn't expect. She reached out, placed a hand briefly on my arm, and said goodbye, Mark. That was it. Just like that, she walked away. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel joy. I felt empty. But at the same time, I also felt something else. Something that felt like a shift. Like maybe, just maybe, I had finally understood what I needed to. As I stood there in the middle of the grocery store, watching her disappear into the crowd, I realized that this moment, this brief, unexpected encounter, had given me the closure I didn't know I needed. I hadn't been ready to hear her words before, but now, in this space, it made sense. She wasn't waiting for me anymore. She was moving forward. And if I ever hoped to move on, I had to do the same. It wasn't about chasing success anymore. It was about knowing when to stop running. And in that moment, I knew I had to stop running after something that wasn't coming back. In the days after seeing Laura, something started to click. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. For the first time in a long while, I actually sat down and thought about everything. The choices I'd made, the relationship I'd neglected, and the person I'd become. I realized that the man I was now wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. Somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of what was important. I was so focused on a future that was always just out of reach, that I had ignored the present, the things that really mattered. I had been running so fast, trying to get ahead, that I never stopped to ask myself why I was running. And when I looked back at it all, I didn't even know what I was running toward anymore. Success? Money? Recognition? Those things felt hollow now, empty. They were nothing compared to what I had lost. What I had taken for granted. Seeing Laura again gave me a clarity I didn't even realize I needed. She wasn't bitter or angry, like I expected. She was calm, strong, and at peace with herself. And that's what stung the most. She was okay without me. She was figuring out who she was without being attached to me, and that was something I had never done. I realized that I had been living in the illusion that success was a substitute for love. That if I just had enough, I could somehow buy back the affection I had lost. But the truth was, no amount of success would bring her back if I couldn't offer her the one thing she needed, the real me. The person who could be present. The person who could listen, care, and show up, not just in body but in heart. I'd spent so long convincing myself that I was doing it for her, for us. But the reality was, I had been doing it for me. For my ego. For the validation I thought I needed to feel good about myself. And it was only when I lost her that I saw how misplaced all of that was. I didn't need more money. I didn't need a bigger house or a fancier car. I didn't need the next promotion. What I needed was the ability to be vulnerable, to show up when it counted, to be someone who cared, who didn't take the people around him for granted. And the hardest part was realizing that the one person I wanted to show that to was the person I had hurt the most. Letting go wasn't easy. I still thought about her every day, still missed her laughter, her warmth, the way she would always tell me that everything would be okay, even when I was stressed out of my mind. But I knew I had to let go. If I really loved her, I had to stop holding on to the past. I had to let her live her life. Even if that meant without me. It wasn't about moving on for the sake of moving on. It was about accepting that we had both changed, that we had both grown. And sometimes, love isn't about holding on tighter, it's about letting go. I started doing the work on myself. I didn't expect immediate results. It wasn't like flipping a switch, but I began to see things differently. I made the decision to focus on my own happiness and growth, instead of chasing after things that ultimately didn't matter. I began to spend more time with friends, to do things I enjoyed for the sake of me, not to impress anyone else. I started reflecting on the values that truly meant something to me, not work. Not money, not status, but honesty, connection, authenticity. And with time, I realized that I was becoming the person I wanted to be. The person I needed to be. And as I did that, I stopped feeling the need to hold on to the past. I could remember Laura with gratitude, without the weight of regret. I didn't need her to come back to feel like I had changed. I had to do it for myself, not to get her back, but because I finally understood what it meant to live with intention and to love with presence. After seeing Laura, everything started to click. For the first time, I really thought about the choices I made and the person I had become. I realized I had been so focused on success, on getting ahead, that I had lost sight of what really mattered, her, us, the present. I had thought success would fill the emptiness, but it didn't. It left me with regret, longing for something I couldn't get back. Laura had moved on, and seeing her at peace was a wake-up call. I wasn't ready to hear it, but I finally understood. I had been chasing the wrong things. Letting go was the hardest thing I had to do. But I knew if I loved her, I had to let her go, even if it meant she would be happy without me. And in doing so, I started focusing on myself, learning to be present, to grow, to not just chase success but live for what really mattered. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about becoming a better version of myself. And in time, I realized that I didn't need her to come back to know that I was changing for the better. I was doing this for me. I started to realize that healing wasn't something that would happen overnight. It wasn't a switch I could flip. It was more like a long, slow process, and that was okay. I had spent so many years chasing something outside of myself, approval, success, recognition, that I'd forgotten what it meant to just be. So I began with small changes. I stopped working late just to impress people who didn't even know me. I started spending more time with friends, real friends, who didn't care about my job title or paycheck. They cared about me. I got back to the things I loved. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed hiking or reading, or just sitting outside in silence. The simple things, the things that connected me to myself. The more I did this, the clearer it became. I was building a new version of myself, one that wasn't defined by work or external success, but by the things I actually valued: honesty, love, real connections. I realized that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I had to be authentic, to live with purpose, to show up not just for others, but for myself. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I still felt the weight of regret. There were moments I still missed Laura, and there were times when I thought about what could have been. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck in that place. I had to keep moving forward, and with time, I began to feel lighter. I started accepting that some things were beyond my control. And that letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant making room for something new. Something better. Months passed, and I was finally feeling like I was back on track, living with intention, enjoying the simple things. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Laura. My heart raced. "Hey, Mark," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something different, stronger, more peaceful. "I've been thinking about everything. I just wanted to check in." I wasn't sure what to say, but I was honest. "I'm doing well, really. I've been focusing on myself." She paused, then said something that threw me off. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm still figuring things out, but I think I'm ready to try again, down the road, when we're both really ready." I couldn't believe it. I wasn't sure what it meant, or if it was even a real possibility. But what mattered was this: I wasn't the same man anymore. I had grown, and whatever happened, I knew it would be different this time. "I think that's a good thing," I said, feeling like I was finally in a place to truly understand what it meant to love and to move forward, together or apart. After that call, things weren't instantly fixed. We didn't jump back into anything right away, and honestly, that was a relief. The pressure was gone. We took things slow, letting the space we'd created between us heal us both. What mattered was that we were both different. We had each done the work to understand ourselves, to let go of the things that held us back. I wasn't looking for her to complete me, and she wasn't looking for me to fix her. We were finally meeting in the middle, as two people who had learned the hard way that love is about growth, not perfection. We spent time together, but it wasn't like before. There was no rush, no expectation. We simply were. It was peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had both learned to let go of the past, to accept who we had become, and for once, I wasn't afraid of the future. Whatever it held, I knew we were ready for it, together or apart. But this time, it was about us, real, present, and at peace with who we were. We had a chance at a fresh start, not because we had fixed everything, but because we had learned to love ourselves first. And that was the foundation for everything else.